Welcome to Miss Retro Reads. We continue with the Hardy Boys hunting for hidden gold. Chapter 20, Down the Shaft. Frank Hardy swung the flashlight, and the wolf before them sprang back, snarling ferociously into the darkness. The pattering of the feet at the back of the huge cavern became more insistent. The boys were conscious of those greenish eyes all about them. The wolves were circling around the cave. Another wolf joined the animal that barred the entrance. By some animal cunning, they seemed to realize that by so doing, they could entrap their prey. The Hardy Boys knew that they had wandered into a veritable den of timber wolves who had found in this abandoned mine an ideal refuge and shelter, who had probably made the place their own for years. The wolves drew closer. The circle was narrowing. The animals were beginning to pace about the cave in long strides, drawing in towards the boys as the circumference of the circle grew smaller. "Keep the flashlight on," said Joe. "They're afraid of the light." Frank kept turning slowly about, keeping the glare of the flash full on the circling wolves, and every time its radiance illuminated a gaunt gray form, the animal would leap back, snarling into the shadows. But as quickly as the light was turned away from one side, the wolves on the other side of the circle would grow bolder and come closer. It was inevitable that in a few minutes the lads would be torn to pieces. Suddenly Frank thought of the revolver they had seized from Slim Briggs. It was still in his pocket, and he had forgotten all about it until this time. With his free hand he reached for the weapon. Slowly he withdrew it, and then, turning the flashlight directly on to one of the snarling beasts, he took aim and fired. The animal dropped in his tracks with a yelp of pain, and instantly the ranks of the wolves were broken as they fled howling to the darkest corners of the cavern. The stricken wolf writhed and snarled wretchedly for a moment and then lay still. The boys edged back towards the entrance, but before they could reach it, a gray form shot across the circle of light and barred the way with a snarl of defiance. Again they were trapped, and Frank fired at the animal. The shot went wide, and the brute slunk back, but still remained in the passageway. 2 or 3 of the other animals came rushing out of the darkness and pounced on the body of the dead wolf, tearing at the flesh with savage jaws. For a while the cave echoed with growls and snarls as the animals set about their hideous meal. And then the revolver crashed forth again, and another wolf toppled over dead. 3 shells left, said Frank. Save them. We'll take a chance on getting out. But the chance appeared to be a slim one. More wolves had joined their leader at the entrance, and it seemed impossible that the boys could ever make their escape that way. The wolves began to advance. The leader came forward, showing his teeth. His eyes glowed like spots of green flame. Step by step the boys retreated. The animals appeared to have overcome their fear of the flashlight. They no longer slunk into the shadows when its fierce glare was turned on them. Instead, they came forward boldly with dripping, gleaming jaws. "I'm afraid we're trapped," declared Frank. "We'll die fighting anyway. I wish I had a gun. Wouldn't be much use against this pack. Turn your flash and see if there isn't any way out of this place except the way we came in." Frank turned the light swiftly about towards the walls back of them, and in the radiant gleam, the boys saw a narrow passage, like a dark splotch against the rock, just a few feet away. "That looks like our only chance. We'll try it anyway. It seems to lead back into the wall quite a distance. It may be all right, as long as we don't run into another wolf den. Those brutes will follow us. The whole pack can't get into that narrow tunnel at any rate. We'll have a better chance of fighting them off." Frank turned the light swiftly on the dark passage again. "You try it first. They may try to rush us when they see us getting away." They backed up as close to the opening in the rocks as they could. The wolves were very near now. 3 of them had thrust their cruel heads directly into the circle of light from the flash. Their vicious snarling echoed through the cave. Frank sensed that they were preparing to spring. "Quick," he urged to his brother. Joe leapt and scrambled into the opening. At the same instant, the foremost wolf crouched for a spring. There was not a second to lose. Frank leveled the revolver and fired. His aim was true. Halfway in the air, the animal gave a convulsive twist of his body and crashed onto the rocks. It writhed in its death agony, snarling ferociously and snapping at everything within reach until it finally lay still. The respite had just what the boys needed. The other wolves slunk back, discouraged by the loss of their leader. Frank knew now that it would be but for a moment. He backed into the passage with Joe. The tunnel was narrow, but high enough to permit them to move about without crouching. They were unable to light their way, as Frank needed the flashlight turned before him in order to frighten back the wolves. For a moment the animals seemed to hesitate, as though fearing a trap, and then the foremost wolf cautiously entered the tunnel in pursuit of its prey. The boys backed slowly down the tunnel, which descended on a slope. They did not know where it led. They could not see, but they knew they must keep backing away from the wolves. "We're up against it, if this is a blind alley," declared Joe in a low voice. "We're up against it if we stop and try to fight it out." Step by step they moved backward, and step by step the foremost wolf pursued them. The animal was more cowardly than the leader that had been killed. He did not advance boldly, but slunk along, pressing to the side of the tunnel as though trying to evade the dazzling gleam of light that shone in his eyes. Now and then he snarled viciously, showing his teeth. "Are any of the wolves following him?" asked Joe from the darkness. "I can't see any. This brute seems to be alone." "How about taking a shot at him?" "What's the use? Even if I did kill him, we'd only run into the rest of them when we went out into the cave again. I'm not going to use this gun again unless I absolutely have to." The brothers continued their weird journey. The tunnel was damp and chilly. The floor was rocky and uneven, and Frank was in constant dread lest he trip and fall. It would be all up with them then, and the wolf would not lose a second in taking advantage of such an opportunity. So, stepping backward, they retraced further and farther down the passage, watching the gray form that constantly followed, never gaining on them, but never falling back. "I wonder how long this tunnel is," Frank muttered. "Can't last forever," said Joe, with an attempt at cheerfulness. "I think I feel a draft of cold air at my back. It doesn't lead outside, that's certain. If it did, it would be sloping upward." There was a low snarl from the wolf. It advanced further into the circle of the light. The brute had evidently decided that the light was not particularly dangerous and was growing bolder. Frank tightened his grip on the revolver. The animal was preparing for a rush. The gaunt gray form gathered itself together and came directly at him. Frank pressed the trigger. The revolver crashed forth, awakening thunderous echoes in the narrow tunnel. The wolf gave vent to a howl of pain and fury, but although its onward course was checked for a moment, and it swerved to one side, it did not fall back. The bullet had not found a vital spot. Maddened by pain, the animal came on again. The boys scrambled back. The wolf leapt. Frank flung himself to one side, and the great body brushed against him. He struck out with the revolver and felt the weapon strike against flesh. Again he pulled the trigger, with the barrel of the weapon directly against the animal's hide, and then he sprang farther back into the tunnel. Behind him he heard a shout. It seemed curiously far away. He retreated another step. His foot did not find the solid rock. Instead, he stepped back into space. For an instant he wavered, clutching vainly at the air, and then he lost his balance, staggering backward, and then felt himself falling on downward into utter darkness. Chapter 21. Underground. Frank Hardy could not have fallen more than 10 or 12 feet, but he had the sensation of having dropped from an enormous height. The unexpectedness of it took his breath away. And when he finally crashed into a heap of earth and gravel in a jolt that jarred every bone in his body, he could only lie there in the darkness and wonder that he was still alive. Then to his relief came a voice from close at hand. "Are you all right, Frank? That you, Joe?" "You don't expect to find anybody else down here, did you?" said Joe with a chuckle. "I'm all right. No bones broken. How about you?" "I'm shaken up a bit, but I'm all right, thank goodness. I didn't land on my head. What on earth happened?" "We must have stepped right back into the main shaft of the mine. That passage we were in was a drift that went right through to the cave. We're at the bottom of the shaft now, I guess." Frank had still retained his grasp of the flashlight. Fortunately, it had not been broken in the fall, and when he switched it on, the welcome glow of the light again pervaded their prison. High above them, they could see a patch of snow-white sky, sharply outlined by the rectangular shaft head. A crude ladder ascended the high side of the shaft. They could see the black patch that marked the entrance of the drift from which they had fallen, and from it emanated growls and snarls of rage and pain. "That beast won't follow us any farther. I guess that was why the wolves were so doubtful about chasing us in there. They steer clear of that tunnel," ventured Frank. "Lucky for us we hit the shaft when we did. That wolf would have been all over us in 2 or more seconds. He'd have made mincemeat of both of us. I thought sure we were done for, and then I stepped back. Wow. I thought I was falling clean through the earth." "Me too. I couldn't imagine what had happened. I thought the bottom of the tunnel had given way on us. Good thing the shaft isn't any deeper. We'd have saved our lives by escaping from the wolf and broken our necks by falling down the shaft. We're lucky. But now we're down here. What are we going to do about it?" Joe pointed to the ladder. "We can get to the surface easily enough now. But if this is the main shaft, we ought to be able to find our way to the blue room mentioned on that map. No use backing out now that we've come this far. I'd almost forgotten what we'd come for." Frank got to his feet. He was not seriously injured by the fall, although he had wrenched one knee, but he was able to walk without much difficulty. He explored the bottom of the shaft with the flashlight. Almost directly across from them, he found the entrance to the tunnel, indicated on the map he had discovered in the outlaw's notebook. "Here we are." To refresh his memory, he drew the notebook from his pocket again, and the boys studied the map once more. "This passage leads to the big chamber by the looks of it, and when we get there, we find 2 passages leading out of it. We follow this one," Frank indicated the tunnel marked X, "and from there we get to a smaller chamber. We follow a tunnel out that until we get to what they call the blue room, and there we'll find the gold. If the outlaws haven't beaten us to it, perhaps so, but perhaps they haven't." Frank advanced towards the tunnel, flashing the light before him. It was a large passage and was evidently frequently used. He examined the damp floor and found footprints that were plainly of recent origin. Someone had been here, and not so long ago either. Today? It's hard to tell. Footprints would look fresh down here for weeks, as long as no one else stepped over them. What I mean is that there has been someone down here since the mine was abandoned. That's plain enough. Well, it means we're on the right track. With rapidly growing excitement, the 2 Hardy boys made their way on into the tunnel. Frank, having the flashlight, took the lead. The tunnel, the main shaft of the mine, leading into the working level, was not of great length, and within the minute they had reached the first chamber indicated on the map. In the glow of the flashlight, they saw that it was of a considerable extent and was bolstered up by timbers that were now rotting away. The marks of pickaxes were discernible on the wall, and an overturned wheelbarrow bore mute testimony to the work that had once gone on here underground in the search for gold. Frank turned the light this way and that. In one corner he found the entrance to a second corridor leading out of the working, but this was not the one he wanted. After a few minutes' search, they discovered the tunnel indicated by the cross on the map. "We're getting warmer," he said as they advanced towards it. The tunnel had a heavy timber at either side to support the roof and prevent a cave-in. They entered it and stumbled along across the uneven floor. Water dripped from the ceiling and from the rocky walls. The dampness and cold made them shiver. The tunnel led into a second, smaller chamber. Now for the last passageway, then to the blue room. They explored the little chamber, but of a tunnel leading from it there was no sign. A sloping heap of gravel and boulders lay in a corner. A broken pickaxe lay on the floor. A rusty shovel stood against the wall. There were many footmarks on the damp floor, but there was not the slightest trace of an exit. "That's funny," murmured Frank, as he turned the beam of the flashlight on the walls. "I'm sure we're in the right place." He looked at the map again. They had followed the directions exactly, and if the map was correct, they should find a tunnel leading from the rocky chamber in which they stood. "Listen," said Joe suddenly. They stood stock still, not saying a word. The silence of the mine was profound. "What's the matter?" whispered Frank finally. "I thought I heard a sound, like someone talking." They listened again, but they could hear nothing save the occasional drip-drip of water from the walls. "It must have been my imagination," said Joe at last, "but I was sure I heard a voice." This mine is full of echoes. It was probably only the wind whistling down the shaft. I guess that was it. But this place is so creepy, a fellow imagines almost anything. It would be a tough break for us if the outlaws marched in on us just now. I don't think there's much danger. They won't be roaming around in that storm outside." The boys resumed their search of the cave. They turned the flashlight high and low in the hope of finding the tunnel that had been so plainly marked on the plan, but without success. "We must have taken the wrong passage," Joe remarked. "I'm positive we took the right one. I took special care. But say, perhaps the tunnel has been covered up." "That's an idea. It may be hidden." Frank turned the light on the heap of rocks and gravel in one corner of the cave. At the base of the pile he could see footprints, all of which led directly to or from the heap. "Maybe this is where it is," he said, and handing Joe the flashlight, he picked up the shovel. He attacked the gravel vigorously, casting shovelfuls of it to one side. In a few moments he gave an exclamation of satisfaction, for back of the gravel he had shoveled away he saw a wooden door. "Now we're getting there." The gravel flew, and in a short time the door was revealed, back of a heap of boulders that the boys lost no time in rolling to one side. To their disappointment, they found a rusty padlock on the door, but Joe remembered the broken pickaxe they had seen in the chamber a short while before he had seized it. A few sharp blows, and the padlock lay broken and shattered. He wrenched at the door, and it came slowly open, with a protesting creak of hinges. Casting the shovel to one side, Frank once more took the lead, and they passed through the doorway. The tunnel at this point was very rough and narrow. They made their way cautiously forward. Frank noticed a change in the color of the earth and rock at this juncture. "It seems blue," he remarked to his brother. Some chemical gave the underground passage that peculiar shade, discernible even in the dim light. The tunnel narrowed, and the boys squeezed their way through the passage, stepping directly into another chamber dug out of the earth. Here the blueness of the walls were intensified, and the wet blue earth giving off a weird glow. "No mistake about it this time," declared Frank triumphantly. "We're in the blue room at last." His words echoed and re-echoed in the confined space. The boys were trembling with excitement. The end of their search was at hand. Somewhere in this underground room lay the 4 bags of gold. But where? The floor of the chamber was unbroken. A few faint footprints could be seen, but there was nothing to indicate a secret hiding place. Frank again produced the map. "Gold at Circle," he said. Reading from the instructions, the map shows the circle to be in the far right-hand corner. He went forward to the corner indicated. The earth here seemed unusually smooth and flat. I think it's buried here, declared Frank. There's the mark of a shovel. I'll get that shovel we had in the other room. Lend me the light for a second. Frank handed his brother the flashlight, and Joe disappeared from the blue chamber. His footsteps echoed in the narrow passage. As Frank Hardy waited in the darkened room, he felt a curious exultation possess him. They were on the verge of solving the mystery of the hidden gold. If only the outlaw had not removed it from its hiding place. He waited in suspense for his brother's return. Chapter 22. Black Pepper. In a few minutes, Frank Hardy saw the gleam of the light and heard his brother's footsteps as Joe returned. He was carrying the shovel that had served them to such good purpose in uncovering the secret door to the passageway of the blue room. I'll dig, he volunteered, handing the flashlight to Frank. Then, with a will, he set to work. The earth was soft, which showed that it had been dug up before and replaced. Frank held the light directly its beams on the place where Joe was digging, and as a hole rapidly appeared in the ground, he watched eagerly for some sign of the treasure which they sought. In his mind was always the hated probability that they might have been forestalled, and that the outlaws might have already visited the place and removed the gold. But in that case, he argued to himself, it was not likely that they would have taken such precautions to bank up and lock the door to the passage. There would have been no need for it. Nothing yet, panted Joe. It may be buried deep. A far-off sound caught Frank's ear. He started violently because his nerves were already in suspense. Did you hear that? He asked. Joe rested on the shovel. I heard something, he said doubtfully. They listened, but the sound was not repeated. It might have been a fall of a rock, said Frank. It sounded like rocks striking against the wall of the shaft. It's just like my thinking I heard voices a while ago. This place is so silent and creepy it gets your nerves all unstrung. Maybe. Joe resumed his shoveling. Another shovelful of earth, and he bent forward. Something here? He exclaimed. My shovel struck something solid. Frank brought the flashlight closer. Just above the earth, he could see the top of a canvas sack. It's the gold. Dig, Joe, dig! Joe Hardy needed no urging. He had seized the shovel again, and the earth was flying furiously all around. Rapidly he uncovered the top of the canvas sack, and then a second appeared in view. Frank bent down and seized one of the sacks, dragging it from the retaining earth. It came free. Joe flung aside his shovel, and in the illumination from the flashlight, Frank undid the heavy cord at the top of the sack and opened it. He thrust his hand inside and withdrew it a moment later, clutching a handful of reddish-brown objects that looked like pebbles. Nuggets! The boys gazed at the gold nuggets in silent delight. They were of good size, and the youths realized they must be very valuable. Frank thrust his hand into the sack again, and this time brought forth a handful of reddish sand that they recognized as gold dust. Gold dust and nuggets! We found it at last! There are more sacks yet. Didn't Dad say there were 4? Joe picked up his shovel again. After a few minutes of energetic digging, he uncovered the rest of the sacks, and in a short time all 4 were on the floor of the cave. The Hardy boys examined each in turn and found that each was identical with the first, and that it contained gold dust and nuggets in large quantities. The sight of so much gold sent a thrill through them, just as it has sent a thrill through gold seekers since the world began. Here was wealth, wealth in raw, wealth for which man had fought and struggled, wealth that had been drawn from the depths of the earth. We found it at last, Frank declared, with a sigh of relief. Dad will be pleased. I don't think we ever really expected we'd find it. We've worked hard enough for it. Won't the outlaws be wild when they come here for it and find that it's gone? Let them be wild. It isn't theirs. 4 sacks of it, said Joe. It must be worth thousands. It's the gold that Jadbury Wilson mentioned. I'm sure of that. And before we hand it over to Bart Dawson, we'll have an explanation for him. Somehow, I can't believe he's dishonest. There must be a mistake in it somehow, Frank. Can't always tell by the looks in this world, although, to tell the truth, I find it hard to believe that Dawson made away with this myself. But we'll make him come across with the whole story, and if he did steal it, we'll see that Wilson gets his share. That's the ticket, and now to get out of this mine with it. It'll be easy enough. We can go up the shaft. That's the way the outlaws got in here, I guess. We took the wrong entrance getting in here. We got into one of the side workings of the mine instead of coming down the main way. As long as we don't run into any more wolves, I don't care how we get out, said Joe. The sooner we get out through the better. It must be night by now. Frank bent and picked up 2 of the sacks of gold. I'll carry 2 and you carry 2. Boy, but they're heavy. I never knew gold weighed so much. I shouldn't care if it weighed a ton. It won't seem like much now that we've found it at last. Frank hesitated. It might be as well to dig a little deeper there. They might have divided the gold up. I'd hate to overlook a sack of it. I was just thinking the same thing. Joe picked up the shovel again. I'll dig down a little further, just for luck. He attacked the hole in the earth again, and for a while he shoveled industriously. But it soon became apparent that they had found all of the gold that had been buried in that place. I guess we got it all, he said, flinging the shovel to one side. All the outlaws will find here will be a hole in the ground, a big one. I'd like to be listening in when they come to look for their treasure. They'll be as mad as hornets. Joe picked up his 2 sacks of gold. Better let me carry one of yours, he suggested. You have the flashlight to carry. It'll be awkward for you. I had forgotten about the light, Frank agreed. All right. He passed over one of the sacks he had been carrying, and then bent down to pick up the flashlight that had been resting on the ground. And now, he said, we'll leave the blue room. It isn't as blue as Black Pepper and his gang will be when they come to visit this place. The boys looked at the hole in the ground and chuckled. They were just about to turn, ready to leave, when they heard a sound from the passage leading into the chamber. This time they knew it was no trick of the imagination. They could sense plainly that someone was standing there. Someone had crept up through the tunnel unheard and was even then standing silently in the darkness. Frank shone the flashlight about. Its circle of radiance illuminated the dark entrance to the chamber clearly. There, in the very center of the opening, stood a tall, swarthy man with villainous features. He had a very black beard, and his dark eyebrows were knitted with wrath and leveled directly at the 2 boys. He held in each hand a wicked-looking black revolver. Hands up, he rasped cruelly in a voice that vibrated with anger. The Hardy Boys knew without question that this man was none other than the notorious outlaw they had tried to circumvent, Black Pepper. And we will continue this story next Friday or Saturday, which will be the last chapters in the book. And thanks for listening to Miss Retro Reads.